go ahead and start recording. Let me get this up. Okay. You guys all see that pretty well?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. So, what we're going to talk about today is trying to do something a little more. I mean, it was you got enough philosophy for me at the AAE, hanging out at the bar at 1:30 in the morning. But I want to do something a little more clinical. And then I realized talking with some of my other endo friends that you may not have had some of the history for what we went through as a specialty. So this is going to be a fun, this is gonna be an entertaining lecture for sure. There is no doubt that people are going to get upset by this lecture, so it's going to be very entertaining for that as well. So if you have any questions, pop off, and if you need to know who the guilty people are that I'm protecting, you can text me and I'll tell you offline. Anyway, I wanted to start off with, we don't usually get to do breaking news, but there's some huge news out of the FTC. This dropped yesterday around like noon West Coast time. Non-competes are no longer a thing in the United States. So this is going to be absolutely killer for a bunch of you who are looking at working at offices. I know that has been a concern. Giving you some history on that, it's been about 10 years. It's been 10 years since I graduated. And around that time, the early 2010s, there was kind of a tacit agreement between DSOs and dentists that, all right, we're going to use you for a couple years. You're not going to like it, but you'll get your speed up. We'll help you start paying your loans and you can go off into the world. And that was how, like, for all of my friends we all graduated. I graduated dental school 2011. I would say maybe 40% ended up in some form of organization like that for the first few years. Very few are still there because this is how the agreement was back then. What happened is the investors realized the value of those practices is the doctor. It's not the equipment, it's not the building, it's not the name, it's actually the doctors they're in. So pretty much told them, hey, you need to keep these doctors around. You can do that with a carrot by making it a good place to work and having people actually enjoy doing it, or you can do it by using a stick of lawyers and legal and suing. And in the past few years, they have just been using sticks. And I'm not going to say universally. I have worked at a very great DSO in Sacramento. I had a great time with them. If I hadn't started my practice, I would have probably bought in with them because it was a great experience, a great location. But I know many friends who have not had that same experience. Last night at our Spear Club that I run, I was talking about this with a few people, and I already know two members of my club were high-fiving each other because they're going to quit their jobs, and they were terrified because they thought they'd have to leave Reno. One of them's his non-compete so large because when you're a specialist, your non-compete's a lot larger. It boxed him out of the entire city of Reno. He couldn't even do anything. And the owner, I guess he had this conversation with the owners a few days ago, and they're like, fine, go for it. We'll come after you for non-compete. We'll sue you to death. There's nothing you can do. This will stop all of that right now. So this is absolutely huge. And the way that this went through, just as the membership committee chair, I want to remind everybody that the ADA was instrumental in pushing this forward. So if anyone asks you, what has the ADA done for me lately? This right here is huge. So any questions about that? This is, I mean, it's literally been out for less than 24 hours. So I'm very excited about this. I think a couple of you are looking at doing DSOs, right?
Yes.
Have they said anything to you about this?
We don't have any non-competes. I think we're okay.
Nice. Good. Yeah. And that's, I think that's really the takeaway here is this is not, I was joking with one of my, the ortho buddy about it. And he's like, oh man, Megan, his associate, is going to probably leave me now. And he's actually having her buy it. Like this is designed to help protect employees from bad situations. And like I was saying, if you make people want to stay, that is fantastic. But I know plenty of my friends who have been screwed over by very aggressive non-competes, myself included. The reason I went to Sacramento was because of a non-compete. They were very aggressive about it in the recent years. So hopefully this makes a big difference for a lot of younger dentists coming out of school, associate dentists, and will ideally improve the working conditions of those people as well. All right. On to the fun thing. Now, this is for anybody watching this on YouTube eventually. None of the opinions that are about to be expressed are anything to do with St. Louis University. I didn't even re-sign with Endo, but I still put it in there. This isn't to do with the ADA. I have changed some of the stories to protect some of the guilty parties in this, because I'm not joking, they do like to sue. Lawyers have been involved over how to access teeth. I'm not joking about this. Literally, there have been restraining orders filed by endodontists against other endodontists because of the size that they take canals to. Not joking. So let's start by talking about kind of a history of straight line accesses. Where did this idea come from in the first place? What all started? And I think that it's really important to remember that the goals and what you've been able to do when accessing a tooth depends on the materials available at the time. So, and then there's the operator's skills. And if you're on Instagram, you know, some people are flexing for the gram and are trying to do things a little more extreme. I mean, I even got Kadami to admit that he does the 14 because he's showing off. There's not really a big difference in outcomes between a 1403 and a 1704. That's the actual size doesn't matter, but it does look really cool on the x-ray when it's that skinny. So as far as what I want you guys to remember, this is one of my favorite quotes: those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. So I think it's very important that we know the history of where endo comes from. Did you guys get much? I feel like we didn't get a ton of history at SLU, which is good because it doesn't really change too much as far as, like, I don't think you need a 12 lecture series on the history of endo. But did you guys get much on the history of endo, like back in the 1800s, anything like that? No.
Not a whole lot.
Yeah, that's what I thought. All right, we'll blow through it real fast. So as far as when is the first root canal, I do want to give a shout out to Dr. Brad Gettleman. He wrote this paper on the AE. This is one of the, I think my final lecture to you guys is going to be on the like philosophy type things. But one of my life lessons is you never know who you're going to know eventually. Brad went to undergrad at U of A with my parents and their friends were the very first ones to tell me to be an endodontist when I was probably 6 or 7. And they said, "Oh, our friend Brad's an endodontist. He just bought a beach house. You should be that." That was the first time I ever heard of endo. So it just goes to show you, you never know who you're going to eventually know and how you're going to be connected to them. But the world of endo is very small. So the first recorded one was back in around 200 BC. We know that there was dentistry being done even way before that, 4,000, 5,000. But the first recorded one was back in 200 BC in Israel. And they had stuck a bronze wire into a canal inside a tooth. So that was the treatment that kind of was described during Roman times. And so this is kind of the first, more modern idea of a root canal where you're putting something inside the actual tooth. Fast forward quite a long time. First pulp cap was done back in the 1750s. They would use either gold or lead to fill that area. And then your very first file, when we think of like a modern root canal that was done with files, was in 1838. They used watch springs like you'd find in an automatic watch and wound it up and did the root canal that way. So fast forward a little bit, first root canal is 1838. 1847 was when gutta percha was introduced specifically for dentistry. It has been around for thousands of years, and it was used almost as a cavity filling material rather than a root canal filling material. But it's been around for a very long time. First foot pedal drill. Have you guys seen pictures of these terrible things before? There was actually one at UOP in a display case to show what they used to look like, and they're terrifying. But the operator would work that foot pedal up and down kind of like an old sewing machine, and there'd be a series of pulleys and levers and belts that would eventually get to a straight handpiece. It would spin around 2,000 RPMs, give or take, so about 10 times slower than a slow speed, and that was the best that they had available at the time. That's how they would drill through teeth. That's how they would remove decay, things like that. In 1895, they started selling these little camphor coated wooden points that they would pretty much poke the pulp with. And by 1890s, that's when you start to see more rotary handpieces where you can use it inside the tooth itself. You'll notice there are twist drills, trephines. I do like that it says flexible here in quotes. But if you look at those, what do these look like? What type of birds do these look like?
Gates.
Gates, exactly. Did you see who this is from, by the way? SS White has been around since 1876, just to show you how long some of these dental companies have been around. Also, I don't know what a plate saw is, but I don't want it used in my mouth. That's all I'm saying right now. And 1928 was the first practice that was truly limited to endodontics. And almost all of these were hand instrumentation as far as cleaning inside there. You have your flexible kind of gatesy looking things, but besides that, it was pretty much just hand instrumentation. The goals at the time were based on what they had available to them. So what they would do is they'd access the tooth, either using hand instruments, pop off, hopefully that the decay is big enough that they can get to it. Once inside there, the idea was trephination or removing the pressure. You'd either drill a hole or you'd shove stuff down there, knock out the pulp type thing until you have drainage. And then you would shove something in there many times until the pain went away. And that could be arsenic, lead, that could be camphor, that could be, there was 1,000 different things they would use to medicate inside the actual tooth. But that's where we were, that's where we came from. All right, let's fast forward. There were some changes, 30s, 40s, bacteria kind of came along as an idea. We started to get some more file designs, things like that. But really, the more modern way that we look at root canals with the idea of why are we accessing these teeth? What is the goal? Came out in 1965 with the infamous Kakahashi paper, which showed using these lovely little rats that bacteria were the issue. So starting from here on out, the issue wasn't relieving pressure. It was we need to remove bacteria. So now the goal isn't just drill a hole and let it drain naturally. It's we need to drain a hole and we need to clean as best as possible. So back in that time, they would still medicate, but now they were doing things like paper point sampling, where you'd have to put the paper point inside there, wipe it on an agar plate, incubate it, see if anything grows over the next few days. And if it's finally sterile, then you can fill. I think Hatton probably had to do this back in the day. I think he's the only one there who actually ask Azar about this. He still teaches you guys, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Ask him about this because I guarantee he had to do this. But even we like a few years before me at UOP, probably in the early 2000s, they would still make the dental students do this for some of the cases that were really bad. They would actually make them sample, wipe it on a plate, grow it, and then if it was finally clean, then they could bring the patient back and seal it up. So that's how much bacteria became the issue, okay? In 1974, Schilder came out with his 5 principles. Do you guys all know who Herb Schilder is?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good. I was going to say, if you didn't, there would be Boston University grads crying in the corner right now. And he was out of Boston. If you've ever met a BU grad, they can recite these 5 principles by heart like it is the gospel. They should have a continuously tapering cone. It should be smallest at the apex, increase as you get to the cavity in all diameters. It has multiple planes, which is the idea of flow. You do not transport the foramen, and you should keep it as small as practical in all cases. So this was the concept he came out with. And the idea was we need to make sure we flow all the way to the apex to kill the bacteria at the apex. So now it's no longer drainage, it's we need to kill bacteria. So this was where we were with the ideas. And again, if you talk to anybody from Boston University, they do treat this man like a god, and they do quote this like scripture. Don't get it. I worked with a couple of BU grads, and they would like, this is 20, when did I work with them? 17, 18, doesn't matter. They were still quoting Schilder like he was coming down from on high. So I never got to meet the man. I would have loved to because he's changed a lot of things in endo, but I think everybody should know who he is. Okay. So what did we have available to us at the time? We had pizzos, which were straight. We had gates, which I still think is a pretty solid instrument, actually. We had reamers, which were these terrifying looking things. We had K files, which I used 15 minutes ago. We have Headstrom files, which I use on a daily basis. And we had good old bar brooches. And that was it. That's all we had available. And of those instruments, these two are the only ones that would run in a motor. Everything else you would do by hand. This is why Hatton no longer is able to practice, is because he did these by hand for hours and hours and hours a day for many, many, many years. And you'd have to create these shapes by hand, okay? The treatment goals, now that we have bacteria, and now that we have this idea of continuous flow and continuous taper, is most importantly, we need to eliminate bacteria. Bacteria are the problems with root canals. We must kill bacteria. You would use a motor to instrument the access, to access the tooth and enlarge it. And then you would use hand instruments down to the apex. I think a lot of us learned something like this in dental school. How many of you had to do something similar to this, where you used a gates or something to open up the top, and then you had to work it up to say like a 30 or 35? I'll show you how I had to do it in dental school, but does that sound pretty familiar to everybody? You guys are so engaged right now. It's fantastic. I love it. It's just fantastic. All right. So what that led to was this style of shape. And you would have a big axis because everything you use is stiff. You would then take stiff motor-driven burrs and be able to remove a lot of tooth structure very efficiently. And then down in the apex, these actually look like pretty conservative shapes for today. I think these are not bad. Those are probably a 35 because everything was back then. But it took way longer to do this part than it did to do everything up here. So that leads us to that more traditional Coke bottle shape where you have large gates in the top to open it up. So the hand files only have to work in the apex. And once again, Coke bottle shape or upside down, depending on where you're looking at it. Okay, along comes the 80s. I was born. It was a fun time. There was good music. I don't think any of you were born in the 80s, and that's totally okay. Along comes Gary Carr. So Gary Carr introduced the microscope, and what that poor man had to go through to get us using the microscope is enough for an hour of lecture already. It literally involved people flying to Montreal to make protest votes at the AEE level. You have no idea the amount of bad behavior by so many of the people you read about all the time about a microscope. You have no idea. But he introduced the dental operating microscope and really changed everything. I don't know any endodontist who doesn't practice with it. I will go on a soapbox here in a second. But first came out in the 1980s. By 1997, CODA had integrated it into endodontic training, meaning it was not required, but you had to have experience with it. Sort of like how we do implants, where you're not required to place an implant as an endodontist for your CODA training, but you're required to have experience with it. That is how the microscope was, and I believe actually still is. Even when I was in residency, there were endo programs where there was not a one-to-one microscope to endodontist ratio. There were a couple microscopes, and you get to use them on molars, but everything else you do through loops. And that was 2012. So that was not that long ago. I am not up to date on this. I hope that everybody has microscopes for their endo training. And if not, that's terrifying. But yeah, by 1999, about 52% of endodontists were using it. 2008, that had jumped to 90. 2018, it's 96%. And it better be 100. At this point, if you are an endodontist who is not using a microscope, you're not an endodontist. Fight me. Let's go. Period. It's just, you cannot see what you need to see. You're doing patients a disservice. One thing that is interesting, it has never been considered the standard of care. Do you guys know why? Can you guess why it would never be considered the standard of care?
Endodontists that still don't use it.
For everybody else who doesn't use it. Exactly. So military, community clinics, they have to practice to the written down standard of care, which means that if they came out and said the microscope is the standard of care, then you would be practicing below the standard of care and could get sued by any patient for any reason if the treatment isn't successful. So they aren't I don't think they'll ever come out and say that the microscope is the standard of care for endo. I'd like them to do it for apicos, though. That doesn't make sense. Like, we're really the only ones who do it. I don't understand why you wouldn't use a microscope for an apico. That one, maybe I should talk to Craig about that. Like, we'll get that done at the AE level. Like, it doesn't make sense to me that that's not a thing, but you're probably never going to see it be the standard of care. All of you are very comfortable using the microscope. All of you are going to use the microscope. I use it for literally everything. The only part of the procedure I do not use the microscope for is anesthetics, because I work on a ton of anxious people and I like to watch their eyes. Besides that, I use it for every single part of the treatment. And I have my side scope, so my assistant sees everything. I can't tie my shoes without the damn microscope. All right, now that the microscope came along, now the goals have changed slightly. This is that technology that's advancing what we're capable of, because we didn't know everything beforehand. We still don't know things now, by the way. You still have the same access goals if you need to get inside there. We still need to clean bacteria, but now we can find more anatomy. There's quotes there because that anatomy has always been there. It's just we didn't know it was actually there. If you talk to some of the older dentists, when you would go to the AA meetings back in the 70s, no joke, a bunch of them would keep x-rays in their wallets. Like, how we show like people post things on Instagram and that of like all the cool, extra looking, crazy, everyone follows Tebow, right? They would do that, but they would have like PAs in their wallet that they would show. Like, oh, here's my kids. And here's an MB3 case that I did. And they would literally show them off to it. You would go around and you'd see people like this looking up at the light, showing off x-rays to each other. And one of the questions they would have is, what's your MB2 find rate? What's your percent? And most people would be in the 35s, 40s. You were a really, really talented endodontist if you were around 50. I bet you Hatton was in the 50s back then. You were really good back then. Just an update. I haven't finished putting together the video. I'm almost at 100 now for the cases, but I've actually had 3 cases that have had MB3s, and I still just have the single one with an MB1. So it is more common to have 3 MBs than 1. And all of this is the microscope, being able to find things. That's why things change. All right. It's the 90s. I'm a kid watching Nickelodeon, loving life. And NiTi files come out. This was literally a box of random files that I have accumulated over the year. And Tulsa Dental was the one who started all of this. So Ben Johnson was the first one to come out with NiTi files. I think it finally stopped, but every time an endodontist would buy a file, he would get $1. He's worth a lot of money. So let's talk about files. The history of them is important because we've come a long way from that. So they started off with hand-driven ones in 1988. Have any of you used these before? I love these. The handles are so nice because they're really ergonomic. They're quite large. But the idea was this could replace multiple K files or H. It's a lot easier to use. If you ever use them, they're really nice to use. 1991, they came out in an O2 taper that you would use in an endodontic motor at about the 300 RPMs and low torque. 04 and 06 were introduced in 1994. Those were the original profiles. That's what I literally had a box of them. Where is the box? Right here. This is all profiles, just because I have a bunch that I got when I got the office. All right, those first generation files. This is important to know because it's important to know where we've come from. So profiles are going to be your very first ones that came out. They're absolutely infamous. Those were the Series 29s. Really clever design where it's a 29% increase in tip size from file to file. That way you're not increasing the stresses. It's linear rather than more aggressive. And then you'd have a gutta percha cone that fits with it. It was actually a pretty cool system. It was developed over at Michigan. Lightspeed. Does anyone know how the Lightspeed works? Did you guys learn about this file? Hopefully. This is one of my absolute favorites. I got to meet the inventor of it last week at the AE. Super nice guy. How it works, this shaft is super flexible, made out of NiTi, and it only cuts in this very tiny bit at the very end. So it's like a really high-speed gates. You spin it around 2,500 RPM. So that thing's whipping around in there. And what you do is you start by getting a glide path with hand files, and then you start with a small size light speed and slowly back it up with larger sizes to create that taper. There's another one that came out where the obturation was a little bit interesting with these, but there was a cool one called Simplifill, where it was this piece of gutta percha that was parallel, and it had a screw that went into it. So you would coat it in sealer, place it to length, because this would create a parallel, not a tapered shape at the apex. And you would then unscrew it and then backfill with gutta percha. So kind of a clever, it was an interesting technique. They don't use that one anymore, unfortunately. Never got to use these Quantec files, but they look about as close to the modern ones as we have possible. GTs we used left and right. This is how I learned how to do root canals in dental school, was you'd use a GT in the coronal aspect, hand file everything to the bottom. These I think are still a very good file. And then you got the Micro Mega Heroes. Now, with all of these, they are, except maybe those Quantecs, maybe, they're landed files, which we just remind you guys of the difference. A non-landed file is a triangle all the way around, and it cuts. A non-landed file, they take those points, they cut them off, they shave. So they're very slow compared to the modern files that we use, but they're also safer because you're not going to transport quite as readily. And the technique now changed. You'd still access like normal. You then take these files and coronally flare. So this would replace kind of your gates, your piezos, a lot of the hand filing instruments you'd have to do. And then you would finish the apex by hand. What that kind of led to then was, let's make this more efficient. So in the early 2000s, that's when your second generation came out. That's where you have things like your Pro Tapers. Everybody here knows Pro Tapers. I have them in my office. We all use Pro Tapers. K3 files. I hated these things. They were so slow. Of the second generation are mostly non-landed, so they're much more efficient. These are terribly slow files. You had the Micro Mega Hero Shapers, BioRace, which are still a pretty rock solid file. Endo Sequence, also still a rock solid file. And the big difference here is it doesn't have those lands, so they're way more efficient, and you can be quick. The only one that the star here is because I'm pretty sure the K3s are landed, which is why I didn't like them back in the day. These, the difference here now is you're not really doing much with the hand files. You need to get a glide path, and now you take the rotary files to the apex. This is the first one where the prescribed technique was to take things to the apex, all right? They're usually going to have a sequence or order of steps. So if you've never used Pro Tapers before, all of you have, you start with the shaping burrs, so SX, S1, S2, then you go to your finishing ones. There's an F1, F2, and usually that's where they tell you to, that was the minimum amount you had to do. Notice that's 5 files you have to buy. And back then, files were about $15 a pop, give or take. There's a reason that the dent supply parties in the early 2000s were some of the most insane ones of all time, is because they were making a lot of money. What changed here, though, is that these were much more aggressive files, and they are still stiff. So what this means is none of these files could bend. You still had to do straight line access because they couldn't have a lot of bend put on them. Otherwise, they would separate. So that led to a lot of really aggressive shapes. And this is what I was talking about, just to remind you, landed files, non-landed files. Okay, starting in around 2007 is when we got the heat-treated files. This kind of brings us up to more of a modern one where we have martensinic ones where you have your control memory, Vortex Blue, Pro Taper Gold. You're familiar with that. Just so you know, the kind of 4th generation of files would be after that, where you have your movement changes. So reciprocal wave 1, where you're going back and forth. Did you guys learn about the SAF file? This is one of the coolest ones that came out when I was in dental school. It failed, unfortunately. It was a really cool idea. Have you guys learned about that one before?
Single file, right?
Yeah, so it's a self-adjusting file is what it stands for. And I guess I shouldn't have said file. That's like ATM machine. And how you'd use it, it was really cool because it was one file and it looked like a mesh. And it was coated on the outside almost with like a silicon carbide or something, like almost like sandpaper pretty much. And you would place it too close to length and then just kind of, you'd hook it up to a liquid source and a vacuum source, and it would also vibrate. And as it worked, it would slowly shave away the walls, rinsing all the time, sucking out all the time. And it created the system almost like an endovac or a gentle wave with the irrigation. So it's constantly cycling stuff, but then it also is adjusting to whatever shapes you have inside the canal. So it touches all the walls. It can be adjusted to really small or really big. It was a really cool system. One of my roommate in dental school, his dad loved doing endo, and he told me about it back in like 2008, 9. So that's about when this thing came out. Unfortunately, the company went out of business. It was an Israeli company. They had issues getting it licensed in the United States, and it failed. But it was a really clever, cool idea. Pro taper next. The movement change there is it's square instead of triangular, so it touches kind of eccentrically, things like that. So you're all asking, okay, cool. So what? Who cares about these damn files? Once again, it's determined by the products available at the time. So you do your straight line access, doing your shoulder technique, getting that constant flow down to air. And it was designed for non-flexible hand instruments or motor or stainless steel. The problem is when you take that idea and then apply it to these new things, you can remove tooth structure very, very effectively. So the reason we were doing it is because we didn't want to break files back in the day. But now that they have this new technique, it's way more efficient. The big problem here is how much tooth structure you remove, how efficient you can be. And what we were doing is we were removing way too much tooth structure on these cases. So this is a case I did in dental school. I was extremely proud of it. I actually did this one with my very good friend, Ravi Koka, he's an endodontist in San Francisco. I felt so cool because he actually brought in Vortex files back in like 2009 for me to use to do this case. We opened it up. It was so cool doing this. I think it was like 25 millimeters long. What's the problem with that root canal? It's way too big. Do you know what that tooth is right now? It's an implant. And I know it's an implant because I was still dating a dental student the year after. She inherited this patient and it broke and she took it out. The oral surgery team did an implant and she restored it. So this broke. A lot of teeth broke back in the day. This is where we're getting into the controversy, by the way. And it's because now all of a sudden, with these very efficient, very fast, it doesn't hurt. You don't have to do this by hand. Creating this shape, do you know how long it would take for Hatton to create that shape by hand back in the day? It'd be 3 hours of work doing this all day long. Like your hands would hurt so badly. I was a dumb dental student and I was able to do that in an hour, maybe a little longer than that, but you get the idea. Like it does not take long to remove this much tooth structure and there's nothing left. So all of a sudden, the idea of we got to kill bacteria was, well, we need to make things bigger and bigger and bigger. The bigger we make it, the better we can get stuff down to the apex. The more walls we can touch, the more biofilm we can scrape off, everything like that. And so you saw these sizes just go really, really large. Like you guys ever looked at an F3? It's a 3009. It's a huge file, like just super aggressive. And I know people who are taking those down MB2s, skinny, skinny, skinny boy MB2s all day long. You coronally flare with these large size. I'm not picking on Pro Taper. Like I said, I use an F1 for all my retreats. Super useful file. It was just, we would be doing this on every single case and they didn't need to have that much tooth structure removed. So you'd remove with these huge files. You'd then finish with really large sized, smaller, but still rotary files to the apex. And what you're left with was just a shell. So that leads us to the concept of the pericervical dentin. Hopefully Cotomy's yelled at you all about that enough, but it's plus or minus 4 millimeters from the crest of the bone. So this here to about here. That's what's important to conserve, because when you look at structural forces, which is what a lot of David Clark does, he actually has a PhD guy out of Minnesota who does it for him. If you look at where forces concentrate inside a tooth, it's in that plus or minus 4 millimeters from the coronal crest of bone. That's just how it works with the PDL, how everything, the forces come together. And if you shave that away and it's really thin, the teeth are going to break. So this was literally what I was told by my faculty. This is many, many, many friends, general dentists, prosthodontists, oral surgeons. Do not go into endo. Root canals don't work. Everyone's just going to get an implant. It's a dying specialty. Don't do it. I remember when Gordon Christensen came out with a article on how you should never retreat teeth because just do an implant. That retreats do not work is what he said. So this caused a little bit of a panic at the AAE. Can anyone guess what they did? That. They went after implants and said, oh, the success rate's actually not that good. They went after, oh, the problem isn't that, it's this. No one actually looked at what we were doing. No one looked at how much tooth structure we were removing because that's what we were used to doing. The issue was the bacteria. We were doing a doctor-centered process outcome, not a patient-centered, we're saving teeth. So around this time, good old John Cotomy, I think a few of you got to meet this lovely fella, shows up, and he's taken along a fantastic general dentist, David Clark, who's the inventor of BioClear. And the two of them come out with this article in 2009. They had to publish it in Dentistry Today. I've talked with John extensively about this. They tried to get it into all the major endo journals. They had tried to get it into all the major dental journals, and they were literally blacklisted by the endodontists who said, this isn't a real thing. Stop. Please stop talking about this. Please go away. Stop talking about it. Does anyone know this article? If you haven't read it before, you really should. You'll see some images from it. It's available online. Like, I literally took some of the images from said article to use for this presentation. It's free because it's Dentistry Today. And the title was Modern, there's a first thing, Molar Endo Access and Directed Dentin Conversation, or DDC. You'll see that used a few times in this literature. One of the choice quotes, and there were some many, many fun ones: failures of endodontically treated teeth that occur not because of chronic or acute apical lesions, bacteria, but because of structural compromises to the teeth that ultimately render them useless. Said in another way, cool, you got all the bacteria, there's nothing left. There's a joke in medicine, procedure was a success, patient's dead. That's pretty much what we were doing as a specialty to teeth back in this time, is we were killing any possibility of these teeth having any lifespan whatsoever to kill bacteria. Well, turns out if you look at the work of SEM work, we still weren't even killing bacteria, but we were breaking a lot of teeth. As you can imagine, this was not very popular. Talking about endodontists behaving poorly, at the 2014 AAE in DC, I remember attending a lecture of a well-known program director from our second largest state, and he had a copy of this. He's from the podium, takes it, throws it, goes out and steps on it and says, this is a shit article in a shit journal by shit people. That's how badly people behaved, and still kind of are, on this topic. This is why I want you guys to know the history of where we came from. The amount of hate that these two men have had is absolutely insane for saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't remove so much tooth structure. Once again, this is all over something kind of silly. How much tooth structure should you remove? But people have literally gotten lawyers involved on this topic. All right, so around that time, SS White came out with these, they were called DC files, or dentin conservation. And they did the full system. As you can see, there's everything for everybody here. I've never actually used this one. That's like a little SX, but I used this file today and this file today. So these are still in use. These are incredibly useful files. The idea was to decrease the maximum flute diameter so that we conserve dentin, most importantly, in that pericervical dentin area, that plus or minus 4 millimeters. So you look at the Pro tapers, they maxed out at 1.2 millimeters. The original SS White DC files were 0.8. And the ones I use now, they're made by Brasseler, but I'm pretty sure my 17's at a like a 0.5, and I think my 20 is at like a 0.6. It's very, very conservative. It really does not remove a lot of tooth structure in that area. The problem is it's a lot harder to effectively clean these so you can get gutta percha down, and these are difficult to obturate. If any of you have tried to start to go small, it's the first thing you're going to find. It's very difficult sometimes to get down to the bottom with the small shapes, and it's very difficult to obturate. Going back to my joke earlier about Instagram and doing it for the gram, some of the reasons that people are against this is, unfortunately, they do not have the skills to actually make things this small. This is really what it comes down to, is so at some point, it just becomes too difficult for people to keep things tiny. It is a lot harder. Now, the benefit, though, is that you have a lot more tooth structure left and you have a lot more to work with. And from a practical standpoint, as someone who relies on general dentists for a lot of my patients, they like this. they like having a lot of tooth structure to work with. If you ask any of your general dentist friends, hey, do you prefer having a lot of tooth to do a crown with or broken down nothing to do a crown with? Every single one of them will say, I want a lot of teeth. I want to prep a typodont. That's what they want. They don't want to prep a giant access hole and have to deal with like 2 millimeters of ferrule. They want to have an intact tooth that still looks solid all the way around. So for you guys as residents, learn how to do this. This is what the future is. You don't need to make big holes inside teeth. This is your time to practice. And hopefully I've given you enough stuff along the way to do that. So what does this lead to? This is a case where, this is one of my cases. I did not do 14, thankfully, but this was done in Reno by an endodontist. I'm trying to figure out how much I can say without getting away with it, who is still practicing and still does cases that look like this. That's about as good as I can. And I don't think he's ever realized that this is a problem. I can say he because there were no female endodontists in town at that time too. So good. All right. So what do you guys think happened to this tooth? You can take it. This is a pretty easy answer, guys.
Gone.
Fracture. Yeah. Yep. It broke. So I did 15. That's what my cases looked like back. And then I'd probably go a little skinnier than that now, but I'm happy with that. That was a 25 V taper, like not bad. Did the build up. You can already see an apical finding kind of coming in here. And that's what the tooth looks like now. So question then becomes, which one do you want in your mouth? What would you want as a patient? Probably he removed more bacteria. Let me rephrase that. I can almost guarantee you he removed more bacteria, but this case was vital. It's not going to fail because of bacteria. This was a SIP-SAP caries case. You can almost see where I prepped it right there because it went right over to get the crown right after. So this was not a necrotic case. This was not a killing bacteria case. I was able to see. I'll tell you guys offline the rest of that. We'll tell you that later.
MB2 in that one or not?
In the second, no. On this one, so that's actually that's a. Oh, Johnny, I love you. The first years, you got to figure out which one of you is going to be sitting in the front, being the peanut gallery. I'm hoping.
We'll rotate.
Yeah, you'll rotate. Okay, I like that. Yeah.
Know which one you're gonna get.
I don't know. This is going to be fun. I'm excited. No, a lot of that MB2 conversation. If you take these to like an F5 shape, which is what this is, you're going to get both MBs. So I think back when we were ripping teeth to shreds and using this endodontist likes to use 5 gates on every case, which is huge. If you haven't looked at one of those lately, if you use the 5 gates between 2 MBs, you're probably going to pick up both of them. So his MB2 hit rate is probably higher than he even expects because they just combine to one massive hole. Mine is probably this MB2 incidence is probably higher because I don't remove as much tooth structure. So it looks, because it is, 2 canals separately. And so I think a lot of the historical lit where you look at these large sizes, the MB2 has actually just kind of been picked up when they shaped the MB1, and that's where they got it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's like a statistical thing. Anyway, my friend Kelsey worked at this office for a little bit. I do have a bite wing laying around somewhere. The tooth is still in the mouth as of last year. 15 is. So we still are going on almost, what is that? 6 years, 7 years, looking good. So I'll keep following this one up. This has been used in many of my presentations, as you can imagine. Okay. Why did all this happen? This is one of my other favorite quotes. This is Upton Sinclair. This is a quote-heavy lecture. I'm very sorry. We're almost, okay. We're going to probably get through the history and then we'll do the actual clinical stuff next time. It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it. For the gentleman who was doing the root canals like 14, he literally cannot do small root canals. And he would not be able to practice if he decided to try to do that. I think this is where a lot of the animosity came from, is an inability to actually practice at this level and to see that you were doing a problem. As you can imagine, the endo community didn't take it very well when they realized what they had been doing for 10, 15 years was destroying teeth, absolutely destroying teeth. And I think there's still a lot of reckoning that needs to come from this. Said another way, yeah, Okay. We tend to behave worse than anybody else. I love endodontists, but dear God, are we annoying at times. So some of the arguments I've heard against small shapes, we'll probably stop right after this so I can answer any questions you have. These are some of my favorites. Heard you have to touch all the canal walls. I've literally heard it of a religious dogma, kind of Schilder-esque of you must take it to large sizes because X, Y, and Z. Meaningless endpoints that mean nothing to a patient. I was told, oh, you have to get it to 35. I'll tell you guys a story about that. That you cannot clean to the apex. I was literally told once, an endodontist in Indiana. I was visiting my buddy who was going there for residency, and he said, Scott, don't do root canals like those TDO guys. Like, don't be lazy. You got to open it up. Don't be lazy. I was like, I don't think laziness is why they're not killing teeth like that. And then doesn't look pretty or dense. I was literally fired from the BU office in Reno because they didn't like how my root canals looked because they wanted it to be more dense on the x-ray. So to argue against all of these very briefly, we have never shown that you need to touch all the canal walls. And let's be real, doesn't matter how big you take it, you're not going to touch all the canal walls. SEM studies have shown that time and time and time again. That's not required for success. This isn't a religion. This is a science. We grow from things. We learn. We progress. The beautiful thing about religion is that it is always there for you and it will always be there for you. This is not what you need. Go to church. Don't go yell about root canals online instead. For the meaningless endpoints, this is I remember when I first started, I finished a case with Steve Frey, which is one of my co-residents. We both finished at F2s and we were like, oh, that looks great. And one of the second years came and it was like, no, you have to finish to a 3504. And we're like, okay. And Steve and I started thinking, we're looking at a 3504 and we're looking at an F2. If you haven't done this, I'm sure you have some downstairs. Go grab them. And he and I actually took calipers and we measured the width at every millimeter from D0 up to like D5. And what we realized, when F2 is a 2508, a 3504, and then she also said you need to take a 3004. So the procedure was you'd go F1, F2, 3004, 3504, and that's where you finished it. And we realized that a 3004, besides the very tip of it, is actually smaller in every dimension than an F2. And a 3504, all you're gaining is 0.06 millimeters at D1 and nothing from there on else out. Does that make sense? You're not actually doing anything. The idea of you have to get it to 35, when you look at the actual numbers, doesn't make sense whatsoever because you're not actually doing anything. I don't really ever have I must do X, Y, or Z. I'm not going to fill a tooth that's draining. That's about it as far as my endpoints of things that I think are important. Can't clean to the apex. We'll talk about that next time with enhanced irrigation, how we answer some of these questions. Even with the gentle wave and lasers, you don't always clean all the way to the apex. And we have a lot of teeth that weren't cleaned or were 5, 6, 7 millimeters short and are still doing fine successfully. The laziness is absolutely hilarious to me. That is probably one of my favorite arguments I've ever heard against that, especially as someone who lectures on efficiency. No, that's hilarious. And then I don't think we should be doing things, and this is almost a comment for Instagram as well. I don't think we should just be doing things because they look pretty. We serve patients and we should be doing them for their best interest, not for ourselves. All right, I think, yeah, I'll stop here so you guys can ask questions. Cool. I knew there was no way in hell we were getting through this lecture. Yeah. So hopefully that was, I know that's, next time will be a lot more clinical based on how to access the teeth. We'll go through each tooth in question. Actually, while I have you here, let me do this and go back. So what we're going to do next time, just to make sure that this works out best for all of you, is we'll talk about kind of how to access through different things, gold crowns, carious teeth, kind of talk about retreats. We'll talk about different teeth and how to do them because, they're different for all of them. The one I didn't know about was the molars. Do you all want, how much detail do you want on accessing the molars? For the second years, I went through MB2s in particular with you last year. That one's not recorded, unfortunately. And then we obviously have the calcified canals one. That one is on YouTube. Do you want like an in-depth thing on that? Or what level of detail are you all thinking? Were you able to see all that, or is it still just me? Did I stop it?
See on what?
Yeah, that's what I thought. Damn it. So next time we are going to talk about, here you go, this is what I was saying. Crown teeth, caries teeth, how to get through every different type of material. We're going to go tooth by tooth. And I feel like we haven't really done much for the buys and those type of teeth. The molars, however, are where I feel like we've done a lot. And that was what I was saying. I've done the MB2s with you. We've done calcified canals. We've talked about troughing. Do you need more help with those in particular? You can also think about it over the next month. Do you want to learn how to do like truss axes or ninja axes or things like that?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you feel comfortable doing them now? I know Rhodes won't let you, but
No.
is that a no? You don't feel comfortable, or no? No, you're not allowed to do them. Both. Okay. All right. I can kind of put. I'll put something in there together, and we'll go more. So, yeah. Any questions? I know that was a fun. Hopefully, that was entertaining. Like I said, I'll text you guys who I'm talking about later. But yeah.
So with like a 1704 shape, would you consider? Do you think like additional irrigation, like enhanced irrigation, is necessary for a shape like that versus a larger shape?
No. That case this morning was a 17.
So like
my gentle wave broke, which is super annoying. I'll talk about that later. But
what did?
The gentle wave.
Gentle
yeah.
wave.
This is a 17. Actually, let me share.
We're looking at you.
I know you are. Damn it. Why does it keep? Oh, I have to double click on it to get it up. There we go. There we go. That's a 17. And that was, I used Triton. Nothing fancy. Right. Now it was vital. I don't think it actually matters, but that case was, yeah, that you don't have to enhance irrigate with that.
Endo activator for that, or?
Yeah, I use the endo activator, and I use it more because it makes the squirt technique a little more predictable. With the squirt technique, if there is anything in that canal, it can be a dumb little calcification sticking out. The gutta pressure is going to grab onto it, and it's going to stop, and it's going to be short every single time. So that's the main reason that I use the endo activator, is to, if I'm not using the gentle wave, I'm going to be using Triton and the endo activator just to help kind of get it not bacteria clean, but physically clean, so that everything will flow. So there are still some of the, like the shoulder thing idea of flow is still there. And if you look, it is a cone that is increasing in size. It's as small as, reasonable. And I think that's reasonable. So I feel like I did adhere to some of the principles. I don't think a bunch of BU grads would necessarily agree with that, but I think this is a great treatment option for a patient that, she's young, she's 36, and this should last a very, very long time for her.
Would you take the paddle too?
It was 17.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just took it to whatever it went to. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. It's more for me, the files are not necessarily there to remove bacteria. They're there to create a shape that I can fill. And that's where, like on a gentle wave one, if you look, did you guys watch the one there's a video I posted right before AE, the one on the number 19. I took a 2006 down maybe 4 or 5 millimeters. And the only reason I took a file in that case is so I can get the tip of the beta unit in there to backfill. So files for me are more create a shape that I can predictably obturate rather than kill bacteria. And in that case, that one was really infected. That was one where the gentle wave did make me feel comfortable finishing in a single visit, getting it all cleaned out. So that's where enhanced irrigation does come in, is a comfort level. I know people who would one step everything. They one step, drainage, swelling up to here. That's their thing. I kind of go off my comfort level. I don't like failures, and I don't want to send back people in pain to patients, to general dentists. I think that's what the general dentist is often left out of the conversation when it comes to endo. We have to remember that we serve both the patient and them. We're not just sending pictures to our friends who are endodontists. Most people don't care about these little things. If I asked my buddy Lucas, who sent this patient to me, what size he thought those were, I don't think he'd care. The only reason he would care is probably because there was an endodontist at Michigan where he went telling him what to take things to. Yeah, no one noticed when I switched from 25s to 17s. Not a single general dentist noticed anything. They may have noticed, or at least they didn't tell me. They didn't care. They kind of trust us at this sort of thing. So now, if I said that to a bunch of endodontists, all of them would be up in arms and have a lot to say about it. But that's also because I did the math and realized that 0.8 isn't really making, or 0.08 isn't making that big of a difference. Yeah. What other questions you guys have?
So you would have done the same treatment protocol if it was necrotic for the large.
Yeah. Yeah. The only thing I would have possibly switched is with necrotic, especially necrotic in the sinus. That's where you gotta, there's something about that sinus. When you have drainage into it, when you look at the cone beam and you see like, here's the root tip and there's that pocket and there's that white line around the, let me do that side, the white line around the outside, and then the sinus is all super inflamed. When you see that, you're going to get a lot of drainage. That's where the gentle wave is super helpful because it pulls all the sinus fluid out and you can get it dry. That's where I'd be a little more cautious and probably do a 2-step, use calcium hydroxide. I'd also be more careful with the squirt technique because the amount of pressure you can create, the squirt technique relies on there being some back pressure. And if you have a giant hole in the sinus, which is an empty space, you can send gutta percha out the apex for sure. So that's where if it was super necrotic and drainy, I would probably 2-step that preferentially. That's just with the sinus though. It's not really bad if it's in bone, but the sinus, because it's a hollow space, you don't really have any of that pressure and it can cause some issues. Good questions. What else?
That might be it. We got patience.
I know you guys gotta get going. I do too. The real fast. So I'll see you guys in May for sure. Am I talking to you in June? Is that a Craig question?
Yeah.
So
Okay.
Like,
Yeah, I think I will be if based on the dates, but
I think it's like the last week in June.
the 26th. So do I get you guys the last week of residency?
Yeah.
Oh, that's gonna be fun. It's gonna be good. All right, everybody, go have a good one.
thanks,
Thank
Josh.
you.
Bye.